how wonderfully you have interpreted my dream.
Mary McLeod Bethune, one of the great heroines of the 20th century, in Mary McLeod Bethune. Her story is remarkable, for she was one that was born in 1875, 10 years after the abolishment of slavery. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. He was the first African-American brigadier general in the United States Air Force. He was one of the first African-American pilots to see combat. He followed in his father's footsteps in breaking racial barriers, as Benjamin O. Davis Sr. was the first black general in the United States Army. In July of 1932, Benjamin O. Davis Jr. entered the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. He graduated from West Point in 1936. After graduating in 1936, he was commissioned in the infantry, and in June of 1937, Davis attended the U.S. Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. He was later assigned to teach military tactics at Tuskegee Institute. On April 3, 1939, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt approved Public Law 18 that provided for an expansion of the Army Air Corps. One section of the law offered hope for those African Americans who wanted to advance their military careers beyond the kitchen or the motor pool. It called for the creation of training programs to be located at black colleges. On January the 16th, 1941, the War Department announced the creation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron. This was to be an all-black flying unit trained at Tuskegee Institute, founded by Booker T. Washington in 1881. Mary McLeod Bethune, a famed educator and head of the National Council of Negro Women, used her authority as the only female member of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Black Cabinet, and her close relationship to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to lobby against segregation and for the integration of the pilot program, the key of which was to get the government to open training programs on the campuses of historically black colleges and universities. West Virginia State College became the first black school to adopt an aviation program and received its first military airplane in 1939. That precedent benefited the Tuskegee Institute, which was authorized the same later that year. Bethune's struggle to get African Americans into pilot training programs began in 1938 with the New Deal's Civilian Pilot Training Program. The program was modestly funded by the National Youth Administration, NYA, a very important point because Bethune headed the Negro section of the NYA. She was also the only female member of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Black Cabinet and a close friend of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. By
My mother did. She intervened with the president, and she went through Eleanor Roosevelt to get to the president to get that change. So what happened? Mother did, and Eleanor Roosevelt went to Tuskegee.
In 1941, Eleanor Roosevelt convinced the Rosenwald Fund to expand the pilot program at Tuskegee. Earlier in the year, Roosevelt visited the Tuskegee Institute Moulton Airfield, asking the chief flight instructor, Chief Charles A. Anderson, if he would take her flying. Despite extreme objections from the Secret Service, Roosevelt spent more than an hour flying over the Tuskegee airfield, which was possibly the first time a black man had ever flown a plane with a white woman as his passenger. Bethune, a famed educator and head of the National Council of Negro Women, lobbied President Roosevelt to resist the demands of the Southern wing of the Democratic Party, which was hell-bent on maintaining segregation, especially in the military. Bethune realized the most important thing was getting open train programs on the campuses of what we call today HBCUs, specifically Tuskegee Institute, Hampton Institute, Virginia State, North Carolina A&T, Delaware State, West Virginia State, and Howard University were included among the colleges and universities chosen as sites for pilot training. Without this crucial intervention, there would have been no Tuskegee Airmen. Beginning in 1939, Mrs. Bethune advised the president that among all the disabilities black Americans suffered, and I quote, "One of the sorest points among Negroes which I have encountered is the flagrant discrimination against Negroes in all the armed forces of the United States. Forthright action on your part to lessen discrimination and segregation, and particularly in affording the opportunities for the training of Negro pilots for the Air Corps, would gain tremendous goodwill, perhaps even out of proportion to the significance of such imagination of Mary McLeod Bethune, the sheer stubbornness of her friend Eleanor Roosevelt. It is very doubtful that the Tuskegee Airmen would have come into being."
Mrs. Bethune came to be the matriarch of the so-called Black Cabinet in the Roosevelt administration. One of the people who served with Mrs. Bethune was Robert C. Weaver.
Well, first let me describe what it was. There were a group of black government employees who were concerned primarily with seeing that the New Deal programs to which they were affiliated gave the maximum equal opportunity to the black population. Many of us were called advisors. Mrs. Bethune, as a senior member, chronologically and by experience, began to call us together. And the Negro press called us the Black Cabinet. We were black, it was true, but we certainly were not a cabinet in the usual sense of the term. But that terminology stuck, and it is even until today used. So that really it was a working group without any official status, without any official power. It was only the power of persuasion, the power of exchange of ideas, and of working out jointly problems and programs. And it was she who was the spokesman. She was the spokesman largely because of her contacts. She was very close to Mrs. Roosevelt, and through Mrs. Roosevelt was able to reach the president. The rest of us were not, and none of us attempted to supplant her or to rival her in that regard. So that because of her position and because of her experience and her notoriety, as it were, she would be the person who would speak for the group with the group's support. Well, she would perform by doing the dramatic. I mean, she would get on the stage and maybe open up with a remark that would either shock or at least get the attention of the audience. And then she would be able to make references to herself sometimes in a humorous fashion, sometimes in a fashion of pathos, so that she held her audience attention. She was the type of person who, when she found something that disturbed her, just didn't say nothing. She just couldn't remain content. She had to do something about it. And that's contagious. And this was why I think she was as successful as she was. Now, I'm not trying to say that she was able to solve all the problems that faced the black Americans in that period, but she certainly alleviated many of them and certainly sensitized many people, as all of us did, about these problems in a way that seldom, if ever, they had been sensitized before. She was really a very delightful person to get to know because, as I say, she had a sense of humor and she had the ability to laugh at herself. And this, I think, made her much more effective than if she had been a sourpuss who didn't ever crack a smile or didn't ever lower what some of them would consider their dignity. She did have dignity, but it was a dignity that was inherent and not one that she ascribed to herself.